Okay, let's talk about healing. And I'm so, it is such a great feeling to talk about healing. And this is really what I wanted to create the video on is we don't need to memorize things on this topic of, okay, healing. Healing makes sense, right? If you're just to think about it when that word comes up, the word makes sense. Healing. Yeah, okay. If I have a broken bone, I want it to heal. If I have a cut on, or a scratch on my arm, I want it to heal because what does that ultimately mean, right? What's the connotation? What do we associate with it? Healing. It's like restoring the natural state, restoring the, you could even say more resourceful state, but the natural, your natural, you could call it vibrant state. In some cases, it's restoring flow, right? Broken bone, bone is shifted off. Now it comes back into alignment, back into place. It heals, so it's restoring that not only that strength but also that flow with this micro system of the bigger system, right? So we don't need to memorize things; these are just context. But I think the discussion is important to understand where the incentive, where the excitement is for you. This is even true if Adriano, you are watching this right now as well. This is true for whomever is watching. And the excitement that I want to share is that think about where is more of our potential. And say, okay, that's a little bit ambiguous, but I sometimes talk about accessing our full self, becoming more of who we are, right? And I think the easiest way I've found to explain this to myself on the simplest of level is what would be our natural result, our natural state, our natural performance, our ability to perceive, etc., without the blocks that we may not even be realizing or not realize that are actually there. Okay? Think about that for a moment. Genuinely let that sink in. Open up your your heart, your mind to the idea for a moment. What would be our natural state? How much, you could have some variations on the questions, how much better at whatever we are looking to do, looking to be good at, looking to engage with, to try, any of our experiences, how much better would we be in each of those circumstances? Perceive the amount of solutions and more if we didn't have any blocks. Now, it's almost a little bit difficult to fathom, right? Because you say, well, if I'm not aware of the blocks, I'm not aware of the extent of the blockage or the extent of the resistance. Blockages I'm talking about is resistance, resisting ourselves. What's a simple example? Doubt, right? Is it natural? Sure, why not? Doubt, fear, different beliefs, even beliefs that about ourselves that maybe are holding ourselves back. These are common and not something like, oh my gosh, this should not be. This is, I cannot even admit this. I cannot tell anybody. Nobody can find out. No, 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 none of that. In fact, the more that we get onto the deeper or the we could say the deeper layers of ourselves and we look at the deeper layers of others, we realize that these are all common. As much as we may be trying to hide them or presenting that it's not the case, there are struggles all over the place, right? Struggles in relationships, struggles individually, in businesses, in groups, in presentations that are so-called perfect online. Beneath that presentation, there is so much going on. Now, the great part about this healing and the excitement that I wish to share with you is that we don't need to have this presentation be the epitome of life. In fact, if you think of it like that, which requires us to get a little bit more honest, an ounce more honest than perhaps we have been, or we have the habit of being, or the conditioning of being. So it's not necessarily to say that it's our fault or things like that. But if we are to get a little bit more honest, we don't necessarily want life to only be a presentation. We want that depth in there, right? You don't want the presentation of a relationship, let's say a business partnership or a romantic relationship, to only seem good on the surface. It seems great online, the pictures are perfect, etc. And then when it comes down to the one-on-one time, nobody else is watching, it's blah. Or there's actually, a wedge or not only disconnect, but perhaps uh, no amiability, no genuine enjoyment of one another's company. Okay, and we can go into so many different tangents of this. It's quite phenomenal, actually, quite beautiful, because as we go deeper, as we go into more of the variations and the potential difficulties that are there and the struggles, etc., we're also going into more opportunities to heal, more solutions, more resolution opportunities and points. This, I think, is phenomenally exciting because it dispels and dissolves away the belief or the judgment that we cannot change. Things as they are in life, in our own reality, in our family dynamic, in our relationship cannot change. I was actually talking to someone and many conversations like this over the last little bit and over the years, but this one particular conversation, I was talking with an individual and they were sharing about some difficulty with a family member, and as much as the hope was there and the hope might be there for us to have this ideal relationship with them and this family dynamic, like ultimately that's what we want, right? We want to feel good, we want our relationships to feel good, to have this, family dynamic is quite an awesome thing, right? People that you look up to, that support you, that you can learn and teach and fail, and it's cool, it's awesome, right? But that this individual is saying that they do not believe that it could ever take place with this one family member. And so we were talking about, hey, okay, that may be a judgment that it will never take place. Nothing can ever change. This is a judgment, right? If we're being honest. And if we're looking at the accuracy of the words, this is a judgment. It does not represent the reality of tomorrow, does not represent the reality of 2 weeks from now or 2 years from now, etc. However, what they may be feeling may be entirely correct, is that yes, this person is not, meeting halfway, is not changing, is not doing anything that has an interest in me, as this individual is saying. And therefore, they're feeling that yes, they may need to stop that approach, continue to work on their own hurt and pains of that dynamic themselves, and look to the future for how they want to set forth in their relationship or their future family, etc. So I think it is phenomenal. I think it is incredibly beautiful, and it has such a great feeling to it, this idea of healing, because on the one hand, we can take that onus on ourselves. We can take that opportunity. We'll just call it an opportunity. Not as we could use the word responsibility, but let's use the word opportunity. We can take that to ourselves and say, hey, I can look at where I'm at. I can look at what's actually bugging me. I can look at what has been the pains from the past that lingers or that comes up as a memory, even though we want to believe, or people may have told us that no, forget about it, it doesn't take place. In fact, you and I both know that it does take some quote unquote mental real estate, emotional real estate. It's lingering in the unconscious part. And so to resolve those things, we will often and almost always see obvious changes, obvious feeling better. Now I say almost always because in some cases it is not obvious enough, right? If you make a subtle change, that being the cause, the effect may be smaller than what you are able to perceive or are used to perceiving, right? Same thing, like this is the same analogy of like cleaning up. If you clean up one small room in the house, and another person that lives there with you comes in, doesn't even notice it because it's only one room, they may not notice that as obviously as if the whole house is clean. Whereas someone else, they will notice right away if a few things in a room, not even the whole room, is cleaned, right? So that's talking about the obviousness, the sensitivities of sensation, right? Of our senses at the time. But even that, actually, even that is only a state thing. It is the current state, as opposed to saying my sense, my eyesight is this, my hearing is this, as if it's locked in forever. That can change all the time, in particular hearing, right? Or listen for the birds at a certain distance, etc. So I digress. The real awesome, and I think it can restore for many people this not only hope, but this feeling of knowing that life can get more awesome than it currently is, regardless of the struggle, regardless if, hey, if everything's fine now and we have struggle, or even if everything seems great, we're perceiving everything as great, experiencing it as pretty good too, pretty great, it can get even better because there are still those opportunities, and we see them all the time, to go deeper and to resolve more that we may not be aware of that's actually there. So this has been a sort of discussion, a sort of sharing of my excitement and all the different tangents that we can take, and that ultimately this healing, when it comes into the context of ourselves and our experience of life, our experiencing of all the things in life, is really quite phenomenal. It's incredibly beneficial, and for me it is quite fascinating, because there are so many different variations that we may see, but ultimately it all comes down quite simply, right? When we're looking to heal, we can focus on two things. We can focus on, we have thoughts, right? Right now I'm putting forward words, right? But the words are in a particular language, and after a few words are said, there's a particular diction, an ordering of words, etc., right? So this is to a certain extent on the mental level, right? This is mental in terms of the mind, and therefore the mind has thoughts, right? The second, when we're looking for where do we start, I guess, for healing, is the emotional, right? I know that many of us have suppressed emotions, have shut down emotions, and kind of keeps adding on baggage, where to some extent, many of us, we are not even feeling that well, or feeling good, and therefore most of life has become just in the mental component. But there are these two main things, and I found that when working with, even with people that I don't know, meaning that I don't know deeper context, I don't know different things about them that provide useful context to help find resolution. Even without these things, that if we focus on resolving the blockages, then we can actually find out, hey, where am I at without this resistance? Well, actually, I'd like to use an example. This is an example from a participant of the abstract art therapy resolution process. My abstract art therapy course, the current course is in a retreat style format, but it is mimicking the live events that I initially started doing them with. And one of the first participants, we'll condense this story a little bit, but what she realized after going through two of our assignments, in the online version that you can find now, there's 3 assignments, much more context, more explanation, etc. Tools, performance tools, etc., things like that. But at the time, there was way less. And after two of these assignments that we did, she had this huge epiphany. And in this epiphany, as it pertains in regards to, we're talking about removing blocks. That's what I mentioned, right? She had realized that from a very young age, she was holding on to beliefs and the conditioning and subsequently words that she thought were her own, that she wasn't any good, that she should not be in creative endeavors, leave that to other people, don't get into the arts, etc. Ironically, she was an artist. And so, not so ironically, which I did not know before she went through this process, but not so surprisingly, she had most of those 3 decades of life going through certain periods of time with what I'd call creative block. And the way she described it was that regardless of what she tried, what method, and all different things to shift up the creativity, just plow through, etc., that she could not produce at certain times. Before doing the abstract art therapy process, she had about 4.5, 5 months of this creative block. Could not create, could not do anything. And for those that are creative, or creative professions, let's say, creative focused professions or in the arts, etc., know how debilitating that might be, especially over many months. What was very interesting is that her epiphany at this time was realizing that, hey, I remember this event that she had not remembered for almost 3 decades. Um, she remembered it clearly, and remembered it to an extent that she could recall the words said to her in regards to a creation she had made, somebody she had shown and looked up to and valued their opinion, obviously, at such a young age, and got this feedback that was really quite crushing. And she says she was crying. She was crying for a few days, but mainly all at once there. And what she ended up sharing with me was that she was sad, but also pleased because she realized that these words she's been hearing for that many decades, thinking that it was her own opinion, her own beliefs, etc., that she's not good enough, she shouldn't do that, was actually from this individual that had given her this very critical, it wasn't even feedback, it was more like crushing any output, and no compassion for her genuine enthusiasm of this creation as a young being. But anyways, she realized that those were pretty much exactly the words of this one individual. What was very interesting is that, and I share this in the course as a little bit of context, but what was incredibly interesting, incredibly valuable for this topic of this video right now, is that after that, she did not have the creative block. She didn't have it for the next week. I followed up, no creative block. Okay, awesome. Going from 4.5 months of this creative block, could not produce, could not feel good enough to do that on some level, to now being able to produce and create, that's great, right? I followed up 2 weeks later as well. I followed up a month later because I had, I would say, a lot more of the skepticism. I said, well, I don't think it could happen this fast. I don't know if this individual is doing this for my benefit. There's a lot of doubt, skepticism on my part, obviously. So I followed up 1 month, then 2 months later, etc. And each time, nothing had changed. Nothing had reverted back and everything. So obviously, since we're talking about healing, I had to address my own skepticism and doubt there, and my own judgments of things cannot be that quick, cannot be that simple, cannot be that easy. I knew very little about this individual, and all the different judgments. That was part of my resistance. But I think the fun of sharing this was also to show that sometimes the results from releasing some very original resistance can be quite obvious, quite drastic. So some of the points of some of the value, some of the point of sharing this story is to show that when we resolve some of that resistance, especially resistance or blockages or doubt or judgments or hurt from a long time ago, it's had a continuous effect in our life, sometimes a compounding effect, that the results can be actually quite obvious and quite substantial, quite impactful to our lives. And that's not to say that that has to be the expectation, but that is exciting. That is encouraging. That is something to look forward to in making the efforts, the compassionate efforts towards yourself, your situation, your own state. And it's quite a phenomenal thing. So when we talk about healing, I I have a great feeling because I know that when I resolve something, regardless if I resolve it in the next 30 seconds or if it's 30 minutes or if it takes me a few days, it doesn't really matter. But when I do, I'm going to feel better. I'm going to feel better about myself. I don't have, you can call it negative self talk. I don't have that hurt. I don't have whatever it might be inside as much anymore. And therefore, I'm naturally going to feel better. I'm naturally going to do more authentically, more impactfully, and more what I call of me. Take care.